Salopanto. So it's been known over time for people to have grand discussions and discourse about many things, right? And that particular a particular frame of discourse has to do with dialectics. And so you have a dyad, you have two parties that are interacting with one another. And in one way, this video is to challenge other people's metaphysics, right? It's to add a kind of a new paradigm or a new approach to the philosophical canon at large, but more particularly to try to fetter out some of the distinctions that other people hold between, let's say, that which is an appeal for the nostalgic and a referencing of that which is historic, right? And so to begin, I just want to I want to read a small sentence here from Dennis Donahue's book called Ferocious Alphabet. And he's running his critique of many philosophers of language, right? And he's speaking about somebody named Woodworth. But what he says is there are physical and objective existence, thinking of the incongruity between the spiritual nature of the poet who writes these books and the material form, which alone his visions may be found. Okay, so beginning with that, okay. First and foremost, we want to talk. I want to talk about that which is the nature of Derrida's deconstruction. The nature of Derrida's deconstruction is to take two objects, right, or two references, and collapse them into one, such that he's referencing things between is life a type of death, or is death a type of life? Is day and night, so you got a dyad, day and night, right? Okay, so is night a type of day, or is day a type of night, right? So it concludes that one in the deconstruction, right, he's basically saying, look, we have oneness. So in the oneness, right, then you can twist the oneness and you can say, oh, well, and he might even be starting off with this premise, right, that there is a monad or a singularity, and that deconstruction is taking the duality, right, and it's inverting it. It's the distinction between an opposite and an inverted opposite, an inverse opposite, right? So it's not merely the opposite, it's an inverse opposite, right? So one would start with a monad, right? And say, okay, so we have day and night, right? Two of these things, they appear to be equal, right? But which one is preferenced? Which one's dominant? Which one stems from the other one, right? And so in the case of, is life a type of death, or is death a type of life? Derrida says, well, life comes from a type of death, or that which is organic comes from that which was inorganic. So then he would say life is, as we're taking the dyad and we're making the monad out of it, right? The monad, singular. That life is a type of death. And of that same accord, he'll say that the organic things that are organic are a type of the things that are inorganic, right? With day and night, is night a type of day or is day a type of night? And he'll say that, I imagine he'd say that first there is nothing, like if you take the biblical scripture, and then God made light, right? And so there was a presencing of light. So he'd say that light stems from the darkness, right? Okay, so examples though of semantic objects before we move into why it's important to fall into the monad. I want to speak a little bit more about distinctions. Like there's a distinction between an appeal to that which is nostalgic and that which is historic, right? In some respects, they're the same. In the modern day, some younger people find, there's kind of this nostalgia, like kick back to something like Make America Great Again, contemporaneously for anyone in the future, Donald Trump is president. Make America Great Again, pointing back to some nostalgic time that Donald Trump, I imagine, remembers, right? That established something better in comparison to the present, right? So that which is historic, now there's an appeal in history because there's so much pushback against postmodernism, such as Derrida, right? So now there's an appeal to eradicate or defame this particular thinker. And since he came onto the scene, even Donahue here has a very stellar and slow wafting critique criticizing Derrida. Anyway, so let me go ahead and mention a couple of these. Consider the two distinctions here between that which is virtual and that which is actual. That which displaces versus that which is preferenced. The distinction between exploitation and exploring. The distinction between attitude and institution. If one has an attitude towards an idea and then one tries to institute an idea, we should know these distinctions. That between that which is rhetorical and that which is grammatical. The grammar is more of the series of the semiotic objects, where the rhetorical is more of the semantic read, or the ability to read through the objects, such as the lady is walking through the door, right? So we can have a dialogue versus a description. So these are all just based in binaries, right? So I'm trying to get you in the thought of comparison of two things: forethought and afterthought. That which is belated and that which is to the future. That which is a stabilized and that which is a fiction, meaning compared to that which is virtual and that which is actual, one might speak of that which is stable and that which is fixed, or that which is stable and that which is, let's say you compare fiction and nonfiction. So you could speak of that which is a cul-de-sac and that which is of a cave, right? And compare a cul-de-sac to that which is cavernous. Then you could take of a supplication, a supplanting, right? Putting something else in place, versus an exploitation. or a supplication versus a displacement, right? Once again, this is the distinction in a way between opposite and inverse opposite and inverse opposite, right? And so then you have distinctions between kinds and degrees. Kinds are like solidified units, and degrees are like temperaments within a space. So then you could compare that which is discrete or hardly outlined, like a fixed discrete outline, and compare that which was semi-permeable, a semi-permeable membrane, right? You could take allegory and compare it to that which is symbolic. You can take, okay, here's one. That which is fancy, right? Like this painting here is kind of a fancy painting, and that which is imaginative, right? It's there are some real reference there, but the ghosts above it are imagined, right? That which is the metame versus the metaphor. The metame would be like referring to me as a suit, right? Hey, I'm a suit. Look, he's in a suit. I'm part of the business office. Hey, this suit went by so he could check out that doll that just walked through this doorway. This doll walked through the doorway, right? And anyway, and so that would be I am like a businessman would be the metaphor, right? But the metamine is just referencing me outright as a suit, right? Something to that effect. Okay, and then you could speak of ferocity and veracity. Ferocity and veracity, the distinction, the semantic distinction between being voracious and ferocious, right? These distinctions are semantic interplays. And this is all to set the stage to speak a little bit more about my overarching metaphysics. So to move you into kind of a reapproach to what I think language can do and does do, right? So first we start with the day and the night, and we say that day is a type of night, right? And then we say, well, night is primacy. So you got the monad, which is night, or let's do life and death, right? So you say life is a type of death. So life sits into death, right? Okay, and so death or the inorganic is over here, and life and the organic is over here, and life comes from that. So to deconstruct the binary is simply to collapse it into the monad, and that's generally what Derrida was focused on. Now, the next thing that Derrida focuses on is a destabilizing of the unit, right? So you have the monad right here, and then you have the center of the monad. Now, by monad, let's say this is a sign for lady, right? So the sentence, let's say there's a sentence that says the lady walked through the doorway, right? Okay, so the lady walks through the doorway. So here is my lady walking through this doorway right here, right? Okay, and here's somebody looking at it, right? So you got the sign, right? You have the sign, and so the sign is lady, right? So you bring that down here. You got the lady, right? And the sign makes sense to the signified. So this is the signified, signified. This is the sign. The word is the sign. And the referent is supposedly this lady. Now, obviously, this is a drawing on a canvas of a lady, and that's the meta-referent, right? I'm actually referring to this particular lady, even though lady is a general signified, right? It's a general idea. Now, so I was just hanging out with this woman, and we were in a band, and we were playing, and when I refer to a lady, in my mind, I'm thinking of somebody that's fancy and dainty, almost a woman of any age, but more likely kind of a younger age. And she says lady means an old lady. Like lady to her always means old lady, right? So there was a disjunct, right? And then we had to get into an argument. So basically we were taking our dyads, and then we found our kind of like the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? And so I had a thesis of lady. She had the antithesis of old lady. I was making more lady as debutante, someone that's brand new to entering her womanhood is more of a lady. And the synthesis was more of just a general referent. Okay, so the sign lady walked through the doorway, right? This is one grand semantic unit. So the semantic unit, it is more like reading the full sentence, as if the full sentence, hey, the lady walked through the doorway, right? That makes sense within a context, right? So if I'm referring to something, like just out of the blue, if I say, hey, the lady walked through the doorway, you're just walking by me and you say, hey, lady's walking through the doorway. That would be like a walled off instantiation of some sort of sense that made sense, right? That makes sense. But if you were in a conversation with me and I was like, yeah, I was hanging out at this shop, and before the police arrived and this went down, this lady walked through a doorway, right? So I go through this long meandering story, right here, and then here is that semantical unit found right there, the whole sentence. The lady walked through the doorway before the police arrived to arrest the guy, right? In my whole narrative. So that signified, that whole semantic unit goes into play. Now, so what Derrida does is Derrida then takes what we would refer to as the truth of this matter. A lady walked through the doorway. Is it true that a lady walked through the doorway? Yes, and you can then start arguing truth. And we'll get back to that. But there's kind of a deflationary aspect to Derrida, which is a questioning of that which is considered true. Meaning, the signified based off of the word lady now. Now the word is just merely a word. I'm this speaking words to you, lady. So the signified is your mind's eye. If I say, now picture a lady, I said the lady walks through the door, right? You're going to get a mental image, or you may get a mental image, right? So you can understand a full semantic unit without a semiotic, just the semiotic interpretation. But this is precisely what Derrida is doing, right? Is the semiotic would be taking each segment, lady walked through the doorway, and you focus on the bits, right? So the semiotic interpretation is kind of the atomization of a particular word, right? So you're atomizing each particular word. So in this particular case up here, right, the sign lady, right? You get the sign lady, meaning the word lady, as the sign in the mind, and then you have the image in your mind, right? And that's the signified. And the reference is pointing to something, whether or not it's actually there in front of you and you're speaking of it real time, or whether or not you're speaking of a memory or something that you're not able to see. Maybe you sensed a woman and you sensed a doorway walking and you never actually saw her. You can still have that reference. Okay, so the semantical context, though, right, is back down to the lady walked through the doorway. Now, that in natural language, that makes sense. What Derrida does, though, is he takes just the referent, lady, under a semiotic term, right? He's atomizing it, and he stabilizes it. So now the question, the truth of the matter about the lady, first of all, that there is a lady, right, is the center. It's the stabilization of that particular unit it's like a parenthetical space, right? And so so what he does at this point is he decenters the center. One of Derrida's amazing quotes is the totality of a thing is found outside of itself, right? So the totality of the thing, the totality, okay, this is lady. This whole thing means lady now. And what does it mean for that to be a lady, right? If you're just going to atomize that word, just lady, what does lady mean, right? Obviously, there's, I got my description, I got that lady's description, we come to some sort of debutante or old, like all of these references are lady, 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 anything, lady, lady in the Tramp, any reference of lady, right? You're just talking about lady. The totality of lady is found outside of itself. It's found out here. So it's a decentering and a destabilizing the semiotic atomized term, the parenthetical lady, right there. Here, I better redraw that. Solidify the lady, right? So in other words, in order to know what lady is referring to, the truth of the matter, so to speak, one has to, the totality of all references, or the totality, let's say you're just referring to one lady, and we get into an argument, I'm saying, no, I mean exactly and uniquely one lady, right? This brings us now into another stage. Let me backtrack, because part of my discussion is going to look something like this, in case you guys didn't know, right? So we're going to start out here. This is where we're starting. And we're going to go up here, which is where we're at right now, right? And so here we just covered part one, semiotics, semantics, centering the sign, or the sign, and the destabilization of the sign, right? Okay, so all of that is where we're at right here. Now we're moving up here, right? Now where I want to go in this particular part of this video is to speak about logic a little bit, right? So in logic, okay, let me backstep here a little bit. In math, you have f of x, right? F of x such that, let's say, x is greater than 2, right? So what you have is, and this is from Frege. Now, Frege made the function f of x, right? And so what Frege had to do, such that he wasn't violating Russell's paradox, right? Right. So such that he wasn't violating Russell's paradox, what Frege did was he first had to stabilize the x. So this x is stable and this one is variable. So the function of this variable is a stable claim. People panicking for some reason. I won't be reading the comments. I'll be ignoring those. Okay. because the comments may destabilize me. Okay, so part of the way in which we can speak both about this process, so that, because in set theory, right, Russell's paradox is that an item cannot both be itself, X, and a member of itself, X, Y, and Z, such that if this whole set includes X, Y, and Z, like to say Mary is pregnant with Y, Jack, and Jack's twin George, but Mary is not pregnant with Mary also, right? Mary cannot be Mary cannot be the infant to herself, right? That's essentially Russell's paradox, right? So in order for Frege to get around that, in order for logic to get around that, right, there had to be a workaround in first order logic, and that particular workaround has to do with the distinction between the universal, right? This is the universal quantifier for all cases. For all cases of X, X is a variable. So this is the symbol for all the universal, right? It's supposed to be universal quantifier, right? And then you have kind of this. Okay, now you have this backwards E is another symbol, right? And this is to cap this off, right? So universal is for all variables, and then you have the E, the backwards E, as the item, and that one that one is to to stabilize the symbol, right? But then when you do the backwards E with the explanation point, that one is a unique variable, meaning what we're speaking about in this particular case, right, with the lady, right? We're not talking about any lady. We're not talking about the Lady and the Tramp. We're not talking about an older lady. We're talking about a very, very specific and unique, only a one. There can be only one lady, right, to correspond. Because we're gonna talk about truth here. Because what Derrida is basically doing is threatening the notion of truth, right? The very notion of truth comes under erasure. It comes into play, and truth itself becomes destabilized. It has to be found outside of itself, has to be found within context, right? And so the reason why they went from a universal, any use of the variable, to just the backwards E, kind of like we're just going to reference generally ladies, right? And then we're going to do a backwards E in the explanation point. That's a very specific and unique version, right? So if then you say, then okay, so that's where we're at here, right? So that's point number 2. We're talking about the very unique person, right? Backwards E, symbolic logic. And I hope you guys are following along. I mean, I'm trying to be as sensical as I can. I'll get out of the way here, right? Okay, so what we're doing is we're talking about a very specific woman, a very unique woman, right? And then what? Then we start moving into this other frame, right? So let's move into why there is kind of a walk the dog or a following the narrative, meaning the distinction between the semantic natural language and a freezing of the situation, meaning a framing of the situation comes into play. Speaking of that, biofreeze, right? Bios is generally something that is organic, which is generally something that is moving because it's above the level, but because I am in a lot of pain, and I rub that on my hip real quick. Okay, there we go. Okay, So that's the next step. Now let's take the conversation in this direction. Right now we're going to go down here, and we're going to talk more about the play, right? The semantic play. So now we're backtracking. Once again, we're now we've established a singular woman, right? So we're talking about one thing. Here's one thing. We're talking about a very unique woman, which is all within that unit. If I refer to her and you refer to her, and we're using the law of the excluded middle, and we're going to employ that and say, yes, we're talking about one thing, we have that. Now, the inverse of that particular referent is the whole sentence is the lady is walked through the doorway, right? So now what we have is we have a type, I'm not going to call it a recursion, right? Because all of this taking the duality between life and death and saying life is a type of death and monizing life from death, right? Now what we're doing is we're re-splitting the situation, right? So now lady walks through the doorway. Now we're going to reapproach the semantics, but here's a new problem, right? The new problem with the lady walks through the doorway is now the doorway is under scrutiny and walks is under scrutiny. Meaning, okay, we have a very specific woman, but now we're going to talk. So let me back up. So okay, so first we got the dyad, meaning let's say life and death, right? That moved into a monad, and then we're splitting the monad once again, but then it complexifies, right? So now we have a complexification because we want to talk now. Let's say we're going to parenthetically just cut this whole semantic unit off. The lady walked through the doorway. It's a single proposition, right? Now what ends up happening? So she's there through the doorway. Now the complexification here in the discussion is now an analysis, the dialetheism between what doorway, at what point was she in the door? Was she in or out of the door, right? Meaning naturalistically, this is not a problem, right? Meaning when I just say it and we reference it, it's not a problem. But, okay, so you have a sentence, you have a dialogue, like, hey, no, lady means old lady. No, lady means young lady. No, lady just references women or fancy women, right? So you get this argument. You get and it's not the Hegelian thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but it does seemingly have a type of synthesis, right? And so what you have then, you call it neutral monism. Neutral monism is basically a tripart unit, right? Where there's a neutral set. Here's the affirmative. Lady is old, lady is young. This one is indifferent to the two. It's accepting both of those. So now we're moving into the triads, right? And so we went from dyad to monad, back to dyad, and to triad, right? That's what's going on here, right? This is what's going on in language. So the dilethy with the lady is, if you say she walked through the doorway, then that implies she's already past the doorway, right? The dilethy would be arguing, is she through the doorway or is she not through the doorway? Like, is she, if I said lady walking through the doorway, right, then we can get mixed up in the dilethy, right? So, because meaning at that point, you're not going to be certain whether or not she's actually completed the process or she hasn't completed the process. I realize my very temperament in speaking about this. I start watching myself like get higher pitched, as if I realize even to myself that whomever is listening to this at this point is either probably finding it difficult to understand, difficult to follow, or that I myself am not certain how it is I am going to tie all of this together, right? So, okay, so here's the reapproach nonetheless. So now we've taken the conversation here. Semantics, semiotics, the sign, the stabilization of the sign, the destabilization of the sign, and then into a uniqueness, and then putting that uniqueness under erasure, right? Bringing it down to a possible dialetheistic position, and now we're moving to a triads, right? So triads in language, kind of like this. Okay, so I said, is day a type of night, or is night a type of day, right? And that was the question. Now, to adjust the question and speak about relationships within concepts, right? Relationships within concepts then brings us to, let's say, some might say that night is a type of day. It's an absenting of light. They might prefer the dark. They might start from the dark, right? And at that point, we can say from the preference of night or day then would be defined in terms of that which is nocturnal and that which is diurnal, right? And then the triad, meaning where the two meet, right? So now we got the binary, right? Because like I said, I'm splitting the binary, right? So let's say the signified split right here. We're talking about a lady. She doesn't know if I'm talking about an old lady or a young lady. I'm trying to bring her to a very specific lady, but she doesn't have that reference. I'm in dialogue. I'm in a dyad with this other woman, and she doesn't know which way I'm taking it. And now we're talking about, well, is this woman, let's say the woman is a human. Humans are more diurnal. Let's say they preference. Okay, so now what I want to talk about is the idea between the distinguishment between the binaries is a third party. So that which is crispicular, right? So in this case, that which is crispicular means that which is of dusk or dawn. The animal prefers the neither day nor light, but prefers where right now, right? So look at my hand. Am I lining that up? Okay, so if this is day and this is night, the crispicular is somewhere in between, right? So the crispicular is somewhere in between these two things. Now, so if I have, let's say this crispicular hours are wide, right? And so for a cat or a toad or other crispicular animals, they might say day and night, right? And pardon me without my erasing that. But let's say the crispicular animal, from their point of view, they dominate over day and night, right? Day and night are both there, like that particular triad. Now where my metaphysic comes in and how I'm trying to use this particular video as a means to convey the complexification of language, right? Because anytime somebody puts forth their metaphysic, you can structuralize and put under scrutiny any particular word in you can atomize, freeze frame, and scrutinize any particular word within any particular person's system, right? And this is kind of like the idea of not finding truth about who the lady is, but approximating truth, meaning being most non-incorrect approximation of truth, right? So we're going to approximate truth in this fashion. Anyway, so then we have a series of triads. Now, let me rattle off a series of triads for you guys, like nocturnal, diurnal, and crispicular, right? Now, in philosophical mode, we have that which is induction, deduction, and abduction, right? Now, normally, induction and deduction are preferenced, meaning as a binary, right? You either have induction or you have deduction. The notion of abduction is something like adding the third part. Now, the reason why this is important, right? Well, okay, let me just continue this. Ethos, logos, pathos. Index, icon, symbol. Sign, signified, and reference. Or I could say sign, signifier, signified, and reference, where the signifier is also the word, right? I'm using a signifier like lady, right? That signifies a referent. Whether the referent is present or absent is another thing. Okay, then you have another triad. You have true, false, and neutral, or theist, atheist, agnostic. You have justified true belief. Okay, so now I'm going to smear these, right? Justified true belief is a type of using three terms to speak about what knowledge is, in the same way that induction, deduction, and abduction are three ways to speak about one's epistemology. Okay, and then you have a triad of epistemology, ontology, and phenomenology, right? Those are generally the triad that you can throw in an ethology, if you will, an ethic. But for the most part, the triad of phenomenology, ontology, and epistemology. Generally in the West, right, epistemology is preferenced, where in the East, phenomenology and ontology might be preferenced, right? And so by preferencing, so how about this? Expression, thought, expression, and application. Okay, so I had a thought. The thought is that I want some coffee. The application is that I drink the coffee. There's a triad there, and it can be stopped and waned at any point in this process, right? The conceptual, the empirical, and the communal. Right? Now, I thought that was an interesting thing, right? So when one is referencing something, okay, conceptual, I conceive of a pen. Here's a pen, right? So it's empirical. Now, communal means that it's shared. You guys can observe the video that is expressing that I'm holding something that is at least pen-like. We can semiotically reduce the scrutiny and say that is not a pen. It may have ink, but it's not a pen. It's a Sharpie. It's more of a marker than a pen, right? That's what I mean. We can destabilize what that is. Even if I held up something and I demanded that you agreed with me that that thing I was holding up was what it was, right? Like, hey, this is a wave and this is a surfer. I'm going to tell you what it is, right? So I have a concept of a wave and a concept of a surfer. Now, I'm asking you to agree with me that that's what that is, but you don't have to agree with me. There's no reason for you to agree with me on that. Okay. Okay, so that's okay. So now we've gone through the portion of the conversation from the triad, and now where I want to go to explain the metaphysics, as always being a kind of like a dissolution of truth. Meaning, my argument is this, that whatever you're holding on to and whatever you believe is a stacked history or justification of your metaphysical outlook is generally contextualized. Meaning, all right, well, first, if you want, once again, you can find the subset, right? You can find the unit that you're talking about, then you can find the context. So if I say, the ontology of one's imagination is this expression, right? So now I'm referring to the ontology of my imagination, right? Meaning that I'm not just going to say the referent is a surfer on the water. No. I'm talking about this exact surfer, hidden surfer on this exact water. I'm talking about this painting. You know, once again, backwards Z, exactly. It's this unique painting, right? And so the ontology starts to dilate. Like if we were just talking about any surfer, like if I said, imagine a surfer on a tumultuous wave, right? You could either remember one, or you could conceptualize one, you can imagine one, right? And so the status changes, right? If you, how to put it? If I refer to breathing, think about breathing, right? Okay, if you think about breathing, you then might think about your breathing. You're taking from your consciousness an analysis. The word itself is think about breathing is the proposition. So that can just be an epistemological domain. Then I can speak about the presence of one's breathing, the fact that we breathe. That would be the ontological status. Now, if I say think about your breathing, right, then the epistemological frame, this frame then expands and it goes beyond. So let me break this down, right, based on the notes. I think we're close to a wrap. All right, let me lower this down here, get a little more wall space. Okay, so that which is the epistemological, the ontological, and the phenomenological, right? These categories can intersect on a Venn diagram, right? And so if one wants to speak about and use the sentence, I was breathing, right? Then you could say that domain is probably on a Venn diagram right there, meaning somewhere between me, my phenomena of breathing, and the epistemological proposition, I am breathing, right? And then the ontological status would be if you were present with me, or you trusted all of the context that makes me more than just a virtual, but an actual human. And I'm not just a robot, that I'm a respiratory creature, right? The ontological at that point would fulfill. And so then you'd have where they would all, that you could reference all of them at that cross point, right? Where in other cases, when one is analyzing merely a proposition, parenthetically just cut off from the world, right? Then you can talk about the doxaxic logic, right? So dox meaning like beliefs, belief logic, such as the one is, there is God, right? Or there exists a God. There exists a God, right? And so oftentimes this particular proposition in the West, right? It's in the West, let me when I say epistemology is preferenced in the West more than phenomenology, what I'm saying is that of this triad, you could say that in the West, phenomenology is either considered a subset of, or mostly a subset of, the scrutiny of the proposition, right? And so, meaning the epistemological domain inflates over and dominates. It's preferred as the inflationary realm, right? Now, but any one of these, if I just think like close your eyes and get into a mindful state, mindfulness, right? And just feel what your body is feeling, right? Now, I'm using words and I'm using propositions epistemologically, but I'm pointing to and wanting at that point for you to inflate your consciousness, your phenomena, the phenomena of your experience dominates the isness of your being. Like you can literally, if you're just if you're just recognizing what your body is sensually feeling, like you can focus in on the feeling. Like I right now, I'd say I'm feeling the sleekness of my jacket on my back ribs and on my shoulder blades. Like I'm feeling that. But if I just absent the notion of the jacket, which is the ontos, right? The ontologic, the fact of the jacket, I can still just focus in on the phenomena of my sensation. Like my sensation, right? And so if I minus the ontos and inflate the phenomena, the phemos, right? Then we have that. In propositional analysis, right? Then we're talking more of the epistemological frame. Now, so this is where we're coming back, right? This is the end part of the discussion, right? We're back down here to where we started, and now it's about the formalism, right? Part of being a defoundational philosopher, right, is to attempt to underscore or undermine or pull up, like you're moving a whole building, like those people that have to uproot a whole building and somehow break it from its foundation and or include and underscore its foundation in order to lift a whole building, right? A whole building of agreement and movement. This defoundationalism is a type of decentering, once again, one's truth, one's paradigm, one's held epistemological vision, one's conviction, right? Is to say that the ephemeral is better than being convicted. It's kind of like in the modern day compared to your great grandparents' day. right? Or your great-great-grandparents. Before the internet, before the TV, before the photograph, right? To capture a moment and speak about your great-great-great-grandparent, you might have to refer then to a painting, a portrait of them, something that was manipulatively created. Now, if no one ever painted your great-great-great-great-grandparent, or if they never painted them, right, then the idea of having a referent, an ontological singular referent, would be gone, meaning that the word of mouth as an ephemeral understanding, let's say you went your great-great-great-great-grandparent. Now, so this is the last one. This is your grandparent, and then these are the great-great-great-great. Now, between these two, let's say that there was no portraiture, there's no word of mouth. You only know that there's a lineage because you agree that humans come from other humans. So you're going to agree that, in fact, there is an ontological root, right, to your foundation, right? One could say, oh, well, that's the foundation. I must agree that I just wasn't born out of the logos, out of thin air, you know, that I actually have a mother, right? And anyway, so the ephemeral, the word of mouth, the tradition of not recording everything, like in the modern surveillance state with Alexas and cameras and images of you all around and identification, once again, attempting to bring us not to a general E, backwards E in logic, but to a very specific you-ness, where that you-ness is in travel. It is what's walking through the door. It's a verbose form, right? So, but we're talking about that very, very specific unit, right? So, where was I taking this? Oh yeah, formalization and defoundation of formalization. So, for example, some people they might want to suggest that the idea of taking natural language and automatizing it, the reference, and putting it under scrutiny is a type of violation of natural language, right? But really, the preference of the epistemological domain being dominant of the West, that's what Dyads is doing. He's trying to get us out of that system. So now, for example, you have people that want their pronouns spoke, right? Meaning they don't want the outside, the law of the excluded middle, to say, hey, I'm a woman or I'm a man. They might be trans, right? Somewhere between a binary. Or they even want to say, no, I'm a robot anteater, and I want you to refer to me as that, meaning they then are asking us to take this particular move, which doesn't have to be, and denaturalize the spoken language. Like, oh, hey, the lady who's walking through the door, I'm not a lady. I'm intersex. I'm a trans intersex person, and I would prefer that you refer to me exactly like that. So you got this precarious movement that's happening true as a result of this recognition of what's going on with one's relationship to the objects, how we scrutinize the language, how we flow with the language, right? And so what we have then, are we have individuals that are hearkening back to yesteryear. They're not moving forward through this. What they're doing is they're denying this. They're saying this is all just show. But they're not articulating it well, because this is it. This is in motion. This is actually happening in our society. But they're hearkening back to, oh, Plato, and oh, Heraclitus, and oh, the definitions of reason, and the buttressing, the basis, the context that justify their reasonability, right? So they're like, look, hey, here's my statement. That's the way reason works, and here's how I got to it, right? Here's all the context out here. of how I got to here. Here's all the context of how I got to there, right? But then that once again is underplay. And all I'm doing is I'm showing all you've done is you're inflating one of these domains over another domain, right? And so, and then this is now once again into public play. So formalization, or to note the formula, and to note that there is this preferred solidification going on of, you know, like, oh, Indo-European white males that make up the Western canon of philosophy that preference the epistemology over the ontology and over one's self-reference that they want other people to abide by, which is, this is where the argument lies. You know, politically speaking, you have people that don't want to be forced to deny the referent that they ontologically are perceiving. I perceive a woman walking through the door. She says she's trans. She says she wants to be called a man to woman trans or something like that, or doesn't want to be considered trans, let's say, right? Meaning the variable, the fixation is in flux. It's in process. It itself is under scrutiny because now the truth of the matter, the referent, is in play, right? We don't know how far or how it's in play. We just know that it's in play, right? And so once again, then you can reapproach doxaxic logic with, like, there is God, right? And then you can say, okay, so now you're going to say there is God. And so there's the epistemological preference to preference the proposition itself. So, and basically you're saying exists God. And so the argument is, what's the ontology or the fact of Godness, right? And the fact of isness. And then you have how it is the epistemological formal, once again, the formal frame is brought about, and that is belief's relationship to a proposition, or BP, right? BP. Now, BP itself is interesting for doxaxic logic, because now the proposition is there is God. And then one says, well, I believe that there is God, right? And then one could say, I don't believe that there is God, right? I don't believe there is God. Or one then juxtaposes that with, right, with, I believe, sorry, I'm scrambling. I believe there is not the proposition there is God, right? And so once again, the deconstruction between these two, okay, is not believing in God more preferable, meaning is it more dominant or less dominant? If we deconstruct then the belief that there is no God, right? So one of these fits into the other, right? And so then it's held in its formalism, right? So basically what we're going to say is that this one's more of an assertion, right? I believe there is no God, or I believe the proposition there is no God, right? And this one is, I don't believe I don't believe there is a God, right? And so meaning this one is a sign of lack, and this one is a positive proposition. Not, I don't believe, I believe that there is no God, right? And so we would say that one fits in the other and the other doesn't fit into one. Okay, the issue that I have now with the formalism and how we what I do, and this is where I'm taking the leap above and beyond anyone else that I know in philosophy, right? is taking any of the triparts, but what I'm doing now, or what my attempt to do, is to put belief, like lady, under semiotic scrutiny. What does it mean to believe? What does it mean to hold? When someone says, do you believe your cell phone is in front of you, right? Then you could say, well, I'm using abduction, meaning my phenomena of abduction, to logically refer to the epistemologically preferred proposition and say, yes, I'm going to employ language through the episteme of the belief, through the doxasism, and say, I believe that the cell phone is in front of me. Or in my case, I believe this pen is in front of me, right? So belief then comes under semiotic scrutiny, meaning the whole time that I'm talking about the pen, I'm not busy believing that my sunglasses or my glasses are here. I'm not believing that my sunglasses are here. Only when one brings up epistemologically and points to my glasses and asks me, do I believe my glasses are here, right? So at one point, belief itself comes under scrutiny, such that belief and knowledge, because belief, okay, so I'm coming back around, right? So now here's the formalism. We've already got around. Now we're putting it back under scrutiny for an absolute, right? Here's the absolute. Okay, we're trying to bring it back up here. Now, here's the thing. Belief itself is under scrutiny. So belief is often considered as a subset, or sorry, knowledge in the West is considered like this. This loop is never outside of this loop. It's always inside as a Venn diagram, right? That knowledge is this, and that belief is this, such that knowledge is always a species of belief. But I'm arguing at least in certain cases, belief is shored up exactly to the same eclipse, the same size, such as the case of these. When it's not under scrutiny, abductively, I know I have a jacket. I know I have a back. I know my brains haven't fall out the back of my skull. But I'm not busy holding the proposition, the epistemological proposition, I have the back of my skull, right? So abductively, phenomenologically, it's just there. So at that point, knowledge and belief isn't the case. Only when we recursively employ this epistemological frame, only when we employ it, do we then scrutinize, well, what is it to know that you have the back of your skull, right? You guys might be seeing it through the camera. I'm still not seeing it. So belief and knowledge at one point are considered the same. And then at one point, and so this goes against this principle of retraction and reapplication. That is to say, oh, did you know you parked your car outside? Yeah, I know my car's outside. Wait, someone moved it? They moved it? Oh, I've got to retract. I said I knew my car was outside. I guess I didn't, right? And so all that retraction is a type of maintenance of a formalization. But in fact, we can skin this cat differently and say, no, we're just going to put belief itself under semiotic scrutiny. And we're going to say the notion of holding a position mentally. Now, what's another way we can put it under semiotic scrutiny? What does it mean to believe? What does it mean to hold something before one's mind, right? Now, this is where we get into the idea between that which is discrete and that which is diffuse, right? So basically, let's do this. All of my examples here, right? This is supposed to indicate a discrete, and by discrete, I don't mean like, hey, let's have an affair and be discreet about it. I don't mean that kind of discrete, right? I mean discrete, D-I-S-C-R-E-T, discrete, meaning it's a Rubicon, it's a line, it's something that you cannot get through. It's a discrete outline, right? Which is different than something that's respiratory. You can walk through my breath. That's diffuse. So you got the diffuse and the discrete, right? So if we say, and then you have that which is discrete, that which is let's say semi-permeable, meaning there's some opening, right? So a gap, and then you have it where maybe it's like I'm just talking about this, right? Like it's diffuse, meaning you can get in there, you can get into my area, right? So if I say, oh, look, this area of belief, now belief is under scrutiny right here, right? It's the signified under scrutiny, right? So we're going to put a B there because now we're not referring to the lady anymore. Now we're scrutinizing the term belief. But to say I hold a belief, and that the holding, when we are taking the epistemological dominant area, we want individuals to have a discrete on or off. It is either true that you believe it, or it is false that you don't. The Rubicon is not semi-permeable. It's not, with an exception. There's not a breach, right? And it's almost like your periphery is more out of focus than your center, right? If you guys center in on me, you can focus on me. You can cross your eyes and you can blur it, right? You're making something more diffuse and less concrete. So if one, like, let's say you're really tired and someone's like, you know, you're arrested and the cop's like, hey, tell us how the scene went. You're about ready to pass out. And it's like, I don't know. I kept telling you, sir, like he shot her and then he went inside and he grabbed the money and he left. What? Say that again. I say he shot her. He went inside and grabbed. It's like at some point, the statement itself, like the idea of holding it or what a belief means. Belief might be something ephemeral. It might be something scattered. It might be something wafty, like, well, I think that it was about maybe 4 or 5 in the afternoon because, you know, it was kind of moving into dusk. It was crepuscular moment. It was like dusk. But man, I was knocked out of the head for like 4 days. And so when I woke up, I couldn't tell whether it was dawn or it was dusk, right? Something about the belief of whatever the referent is in, let's say, a proposition that is not about belief, doxacism, right? But in this case, we're referring to something of an abstract, right? So now the other thing is the proposition then comes under scrutiny. Right, so then we have B, lowercase b, and we're going to inflate the proposition. And we're going to put the proposition now under semiotic scrutiny. And this particular proposition is about God. So we're going to talk about the referent, right? In the first case where we say, oh, a car. We're talking about like, oh, someone stole my car. He went outside, he shot a lady, got up in the car, he stole the car. We talk about how certain things are blurry in it. It's more like testifying is a type of spiralic reiteration, a demand, a rearticulation to a center, right? But when you talk about something like God, right, then the referent is under scrutiny, right? So if someone says, oh, hey, I believe there's God. Well, then you can say, oh, do you mean the Abrahamic God? Yeah. You mean the Abrahamic God that's all powerful, all knowing, and all good? Yeah, that one. You mean the Christian version or do you mean the Muslim version, right? And you can try to narrow it down. Once again, like try to figure out which domain God fits in. Like what are they exactly talking about, right? But if I took 12 people randomly across the globe and all of them said, yeah, I believe in there's a God, then we're presuming, first of all, that they've already, we're not overcomplicating the belief, right? You're just accepting the natural language, I believe in God. But if you found out that, well, one's a Hindu, one's a spiritualist, one's a Muslim, one's a Christian, someone's a Buddhist that has a different referent for God, then now, once again, we've got a destabilization, right? Meaning you have, let's say, 5 different answers, and now the referent God is at play. It's a variable at that point. Once again, so the x of f of x, right? Once again, the f of x is at play. So we've gone from the referent now, we don't know, right, whether or not we're talking about a very specific and unique God, a general God, just the backwards Z, or a universal God, this upside down V with the line through it, right? So the quantifier then is unknown, right? We don't know how we're quantifying the referent, right? And so then the belief and the proposition, both under scrutiny, have a different sort of play, right? And so the idea with doxacism is you go, okay, we're going to exact the proposition and all of the referent. We're going to exact the belief, but we're going to do a lowercase proposition where the referent might be at play. We're going to do a lowercase belief where belief itself is not, we're not holding it, we're not steadfast on the belief, but what it is we're referring to, let's say, is I'm a Christian Abrahamic God with all of the fixings, right? And then, and then you can break that in, I'm a Protestant, a Baptist, a Mormon, and so once again, any formalization, any fix. Well, let's go to the last one. The last one is lowercase b, lowercase p, right? Where both of them are within natural language and none of them are at scrutiny, right? So you have different relationships with doxacism. So we're back at that point. See, because there's a second pass in the dialogue, right? And so we've already gone there down to belief again, or formalism. Went up back to re-scrutinizing here. So we're actually over here on the second pass. And so essentially, my metaphysic, this is what I'm driving at. This is where I'm trying to take you. This is where I'm trying to take you all, right? The metaphysic that I believe in has to do with stacking triads, accepted triads, and then figuring out what those triads are through an indexing, right? So, for example, we could say, if we could line up triads and say, in this front triad, we have justified true belief. And the second one, we have, so we have a knowledge here, right? And then in this one, we say we have epistemology, ontology, and phenomenology, right? And we break that one there. And this one, we'll say we have induction, abduction, and deduction, right? Then my metaphysic, right? My metaphysic, how it is that we should be approaching language and semantics and knowledge and bring it into the future as a system, as a new system, as something like this system, right, would be to take a proposition like the lady was walking through the doorway, right? And then how we'd have to break this down is this, right? Of course, I already forgot what my first one was here. Anyway, and so let me just mention this. Like, okay, so if I am the witness of the lady, then I'm using abduction to witness it, right? It was just a fact that I'm referencing later on, right? So at the moment, it was merely a phenomena that I was witnessing. So the arrow would go through the phenomenology and it would go through abduction, right? Now, if I'm reporting it, right, if I'm reporting it, then I could say, okay, somewhere between the phenomenology and the epistemology, I'm reporting something, right? And that, let's say that there was only one door to the place and I didn't witness it, but she was no longer in the space. Then I could deduce, use deduction at that point. And so the phenomena and the epistemology, the claim would be there. The fact, so somewhere between the epistemology and the ontology, we would then run a line through the triad, right? And we would say I have used deduction because she was in the space when I last noticed, and then I spun around and she's no longer there. So deductively, I'm saying she left the space, but I didn't witness it, so the phenomenology is not there. So now I'm using the epistemology and deduction, right? So that's how we're going to parse that triad. We're going to take two triads and we're going to lay them on each other. We're going to take multiple triads, one after another. And then we're just going to weave through each indexing, right? In what manner was something observed? In what manner can we speak about it? In what manner does it make sense to speak about these things? That's my metaphysic. That's the breakdown. We're an hour and 20, so I'm just going to say thank you for listening, and I hope that it was informative and that you guys liked it, and yada, yada, yada. Whatever that is. Here we go. I'll go. It ain't. All right. Have a good one, guys. Thanks for tuning in if you got through it all.